Welcome to Episode 8 of Fixing America with J. Mel. Presidential Power and Democracy, What the Constitution Actually Says. Before we move past our discussion on forms of government, my research shows that across all history, the form of government that has been the most sustainable and delivered the most prosperity, individual rights, and freedoms has been liberal representative democracies. So, when I advocate fixing America, the model I propose as a template is the liberal representative democracy. But that would be up to the citizens of the First Continental Congress of the 21st century. A discussion of the different types of democracies might help us understand how to fix our democracy. There are only two types, direct and representative democracies. The first type, a direct democracy, is where the citizens directly vote on laws and policies. It often uses referendums or initiatives. Examples are ancient Athens and modern Switzerland, which has a semi-direct democracy. Use of a direct or semi-direct democracy would seem to be feasible in this technological age or in smaller populated countries. Direct citizen involvement in our system with the Internet, encryption, and adequate cybersecurity is easy to envision. Using citizen referendums to halt or reverse minority rule or authoritarian actions by the president is also easy to envision. It could even be used as an emergency system to stop political acrimony and legislative gridlock, or to tame a rogue Supreme Court. What do you think? The second type of democracy is a representative democracy, frequently called a republic, where citizens elect representatives to represent their interest in the legislature and Senate. Examples are the United States, India, and most modern democracies. This is what we have now. As we have and will continue to discuss, it ain't working. There are three types of representative democracies based on how they elect the president. They are presidential, parliamentary, and semi-presidential democracies. Only the first type will be addressed in this episode. A presidential democracy is one where the president is elected separately from the legislature and Congress. There is supposed to be a clearly defined separation of powers between the three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. Examples are the United States, Brazil, and Mexico. Please do not let anyone tell you that because we have a presidential democracy and elect our president separately from our legislators and senators, that he, as the head of the executive branch, is constitutionally mandated with more power than the other two branches of government. The notion that Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution vests the president with controls beyond the executive branch, that usurps the power of the legislative branch to make laws, control federal spending and taxation, declare war, and confirm presidential appointments and treaties, is wrong. The Trump administration has adopted and is attempting to execute the Project 2025 Presidential Transition Project, published by the Heritage Foundation. That project is based on a presidential powers theory called the unitary executive theory, which argues that when Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution states that, and I quote, "The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America," end quote. It means, according to Donald Trump, I have the right to do whatever I want as president. In other words, Trump thinks it makes him a king. But that is just a theory, and that interpretation is unconstitutional. He has such power only because the United States legislature and Senate are under his political control and the control of the oligarchs making up his inner circle that have yielded power to him. The unitary executive theory was debated in 1787, but it did not resurface for 190 years. On May 19, 1977, Richard Nixon made his infamous response in a David Frost interview when he said, quote, "When the president does it, that means it's not illegal," end quote. That was a fitting debut for the theory, introduced by a disgraced president who demonstrated a profound abuse of presidential power, undermined the rule of law, and led to a deep erosion in public trust in the government. It seems fitting that it resurfaced again 238 years later with Donald Trump proclaiming, and I quote again, "I have the right to do whatever I want as president," end quote. To understand what the Constitution says, we need to look at the first three articles, 1, 2, and 3 of the United States Constitution. Article 1 creates the legislative branch, Article 2 creates the executive branch, and Article 3 creates the judicial branch. Article 1, Section 1 states, and I quote, "All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives," end quote. Article 2, Section 1 begins, quote, "The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America," end quote. It thereafter defines the term of office for the President and Vice President, removal from office, qualifications for office, compensation, oath, and operation of the Electoral College. It does not define or describe any powers. Article 3, Section 1 of the United States Constitution begins, and I quote, "The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish," end quote. It establishes the judge's tenure and compensation. Section 2 establishes the subject matter jurisdiction of the courts. Section 3 deals with treason. I grouped the vesting clauses of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government together to show that they are the same. Each says that the representative powers of that branch of government are vested in that respective branch of government. I did that for a very specific reason, to point out the idiocy of the major argument underlying the unitary executive theory, that the executive branch was intended to have extraordinary powers because of that vesting language. It is beyond question that our framers intended to create three separate branches of government, and that each branch was intended to be a check and balance on each other branch so that no branch was dominant. In other words, they intended to create three co-equal branches of government that would work in harmony, but keep each branch within its defined guardrails. So how does the vesting clause of one branch of government that is exactly like the vesting clause of the other two branches of government support the argument that the executive branch is thereby intended to have more powers than the other two? It does not make any sense. It is, however, consistent with the argument that all three branches of government were intended to be co-equal and to work in harmony with each other, being checks and balances against the others. We can also look at the guardrails themselves. The guardrails for each of the three branches of government are defined in each of the Articles 1, 2, and 3 of the Constitution. So, if we examine those guardrails, we will have defined the parameters of the powers of each branch of the government. In other words, the powers granted by Article 1 to the legislative branch are exclusive to that branch of government. The powers granted by Article 2 to the executive branch are exclusive to that branch of government, and the powers granted by Article 3 to the judicial branch are exclusive to that branch of government. So let's begin with Article 1. Article 1, Section 1, we've already discussed. Article 1, Section 2 through 6 establishes Congress's bicameral structure, detailing the House's representation based on population, election process, and impeachment powers. It outlines the Senate structure with 2 senators per state, their terms, and the election process. It mandates that states manage election regulations, describes each House's ability to judge members' qualification, and set its own rules. It prohibits members from holding other federal offices and grants congressional members certain privileges like immunity from arrest during attendance at sessions. Article 1, Section 7 outlines the power of the purse by requiring all bills for raising revenue to originate in the House of Representatives. It also describes the standard legislative process where bills must pass both the House and the Senate before being sent to the President. The President can sign a bill into law, veto it, or allow it to become law automatically after 10 days if not signed. Congress can override a presidential veto with a 2/3 vote, both chambers. Article 1, Section 8, commonly called the Enumeration Powers Clause, grants Congress the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imports, and excises, to pay debts and provide for common defense and general welfare of the United States, to borrow money, regulate commerce, establish uniform rules of naturalization and bankruptcy, coin money, and fix standards of weights and measures, to establish post offices and post roads, promote progress of science and useful arts, constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas, to declare war, make rules concerning capture on land and water, raise and support armies, provide and maintain a navy, make rules for government and regulation of land and naval forces, provide for the calling forth of a militia to execute laws of the Union, suppress insurrection, and repel invasions. That's a lot. Article 1, Section 9 grants Congress the power to regulate migration and importation of people, to issue writ of habeas corpus, which shall not be suspended unless in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. And no bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed, and it provides that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and no title of nobility shall be granted without the consent of Congress. Now, let's first see exactly what Article 2 provides. Article 2, Section 1 contains the vesting clause and no powers. Article 2, Section 2 makes the President the Commander-in-Chief of the military, but his authority over state militia is limited to, and I quote, when called into actual service of the United States, end quote. It also states that, and I quote, he may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, end quote. It grants him the power to grant pardons and reprieves for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. It gives him the power to make treaties with 2/3 Senate approval, the power to nominate ambassadors, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, with the advice and consent of the Senate. And it gives him the power to fill vacancies during recess of the Senate by granting commissions, which shall expire at the end of their next session. Article 2, Section 3 requires the President to give Congress an annual State of the Union address and make recommendations. He has the power, on extraordinary occasions, to convene both houses or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he thinks proper. He has a duty to receive ambassadors and other public ministers, to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, and to commission all officers of the United States. Article 1, Section 4 is the impeachment clause, which grants no powers. Congress is the branch of government that is most responsible for creating the federal bureaucracies, since it passes laws to establish agencies and grants them the authority and funding to carry out their duties. To say that after 238 years, that our president suddenly has the unrestricted lawful right and power to abolish, diminish, consolidate, wreck, sell, embellish, expand, or strip any and all of our federal agencies is preposterous. Donald Trump attacked our bureaucracy by modifying, without authorization, an existing agency with a benevolent purpose, headed up by his oligarch political contributor who had extensive conflicts of interest, which violently entered the various agencies, stole publicly archived private data, fired employees without notice and without cause, and in violation of their civic rights and often in violation of court orders. They deprived food and medicine to thousands of people dependent on our aid, causing tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths. Congress and our Supreme Court both failed to rein in a tyrannical president and his allies hell-bent on destroying the federal bureaucracy. Maybe it needed reconstruction, but blowing up the whole government to get rid of a few bad parts is not wise. Our concern on this podcast is to determine why Congress and our Supreme Court failed and how to fix it. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Keep those likes, comments, and subscriptions coming. See you next time as we explore more about fixing America with J. Mill. Be safe and keep resisting.